Okay, Swan, 1914. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall not be here for long, and nor will you. Nature has taken its course. For many of us, the mortal span is ended. For others, death approaches swiftly. It must be so. I speak to you from my desk, and those of you who live are, many of you, scattered across the globe. But let us entertain the notion that we are all present to each other this evening in the lecture theatre of the Literary and Philosophical Society in Newcastle, as we were present, numbering, it is said, 700, on the night when I addressed you in this very room on the 20th of October 1880, Lord Armstrong in the chair. At the conclusion of my address, I asked for the 70 gas jets which at that time illuminated the room to be turned off. Let us suppose that, and let us endow ourselves with temporary immortality. Turn off the gas. Here we are then, in the dark, are we not? As in the darkness that lay on the face of the waters. Now then, bear with my story. I shall be brief. When I was a boy, the poor went to bed at sunset and frightened their children with the bogeyman Bonaparte. My family was never quite poor, but our fortunes declined by stages because of my father's generosity and improvidence and his trusting nature. I most remember our house in Pallion looking down onto the wooded slopes and shipyards of the Weir. We children would sing our adaptation of a Methodist hymn, and then we'll shout and shine and sing and make the Pallion arches ring when all the swans come home. I think I spent my life attempting to come home. We had to leave that house and then another, and at last up sticks to Newcastle, but not before my curiosity led me into all the yards and workshops of the banks of the Weir to pursue my fascination with the physical processes of God's creation. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not, as John's Gospel states. It was often a dark world, but at that early date science gave me means to light my way. As to my incandescent light bulb, it was a process of many years of thought and experimentation that led me at last to solve the fundamental problem of the device: how to create a bulb that would not only convert electricity into light, but do so over a sustained period, thus making the bulb a useful domestic object. As I remarked before, there is no invention that does not possess a history, none that does not build on and learn from or owe a debt to the work of others. Fame, as we know, accrues to whoever makes the decisive step. Much labour and argument has been expended on the matter of who came first, myself or Mr. Edison. I did, ladies and gentlemen, of course, as the record shows. But that is not really the point. Neither are the fame or the money. The point was the illumination, the light for people to read and work and think, or simply sit companionably by, to drive the darkness outdoors at least. The means to achieve this, we theorised, was by producing a vacuum in the glass bulb and allowing the filament to heat until it generated light. Why then did this for so long prove to be such a brief candle in practice? As the poet Marvell wrote, you will recall in his great ode on Cromwell, nature that hateth emptiness allows of penetration less. Our problem was that our emptiness, our vacuum, was no such thing. The glass chamber was imperfectly purged of atmospheric gas. When I discovered this, I ensured that the vacuum was improved and the seals around the filaments tightened, but still the bulb would blacken and still the light would die. At length, I realized that what I faced was what might be considered an example of penetration, of two things occupying the same space. An impossibility, of course. On the one hand, the vacuum, on the other, the unpurged residues attaching to the filament itself. Until then, the instrument of light had tended to produce darkness, but now I saw, and I could account for the processes involved. If the carbon filament were heated to extract the residual gas before being sealed in the bulb, sustained illumination would be achieved. Thus we and our children live in a world of light. Eureka, as the journalist would have us declare. But the world of light was not the work of a moment or an accident. As you also know, what became known as my carbon process enabled the making of photographs of unprecedented quality. The world would not only be illuminated, it would be preserved against the passage of time. This is, of course, the function of art, to preserve, to make, as the poet Horace said, a monument more lasting than bronze. Immortality, or its image, is what all of us long for, and the image of immortality that I myself have constantly before my mind's eye is a family photograph taken indoors with the benefit of electric light at the house in Pallium, impossibly. Another case of penetration. It is a crowded picture, for I sit with my two families and my two wives, Fanny and Hannah, all our children, and my friend, colleague and brother-in-law, John Mawson. The picture is perfect, but as I say, it is impossible. The disaster which befell us made no sense, I have told myself. It was simply something that must be borne, a part of the pains of the human lot. And of course we are never free of our losses, and why should we wish to be, since they are evidence of the durability of love? Had I seen John Mawson on the day, perhaps at an early meeting in my house at Lees's Terrace, what might we have said? Have you everything you require, John? Yes, I have my equipment. There will be men to help on the site and to carry the material away to the town moor. And is there still no explanation of why the material has been found? None. It was simply discovered in the stable. I have to say I feel disquiet at this task you have undertaken, John. Likewise, he might have said, it is the cost of being both a chemist and the sheriff. We might have laughed at that coincidence. I would not have mentioned that Nobel's own brother Emil had died at 21 in an explosion of nitroglycerin at the family's factory in Sweden. And I would not have mentioned the fatal explosion in San Francisco the previous year. It would not have been necessary to do so. John and a party of helpers, including a police constable and several local youths, entered a cellar in Old Swan Yard off Cloth Market, where a store of nitroglycerin had been discovered. How it came there and for what intended use seems never to have been satisfactorily determined. The party went by carriage and cart to dispose of the material, John having chosen the town moor as an appropriate site. It seems that John and some of his party carried away some of the open canisters from the place where their liquid contents had been poured away into the earth on the town moor, intending to dispose of the remaining crystalline deposits in another spot a little way off. It was then that the disaster occurred. Witnesses said that when the explosion shook the earth, that human limbs were seen to be hurled into the air. Now that you have all seen photographs and moving images, you can the better imagine this cruel catastrophe for yourselves. The world is able to turn its attention to its own seeming impossibilities. We can see what cannot and should not be seen. John Mawson and several others were taken away to hospital, but he died that night of his injuries. My guide and partner, my great encourager, my friend, was snatched away. But this was not all. John Mawson's death seems to have produced what Herb Bodenstein later described as a chain reaction, whereby if two molecules react, not only molecules of the final reaction products are formed, but also some unstable molecules having the property of being able to further react with the parent molecules, and so on. Even now, I say this as if the impartial language of science might mitigate the subsequent sickness and death of my wife, Fanny, and then of our two twin sons, which occurred within a few months of John Mawson's accident. The task of science is to illuminate, is it not? It is possible, though, that there are times when the world it brings into view seems impossible to contemplate, when our sustaining beliefs and the optimism by which I myself had always previously been marked fall away, as into a void without form or meaning. This was my state for a year or more after these several bereavements. My thoughts stagnated and wandered away in a vagrant manner, almost without control, and I was left with a painful sense of having neglected to fulfill a duty. And then we'll shout and shine and sing and make the Palian arches ring when all the swans come home. There was to be no such homecoming, it seemed. Later, and at different times, I wrote the two following sharply contrasting comments in my diary. Firstly, the passing of genius through life is like the passing of a shooting star through our atmosphere, coming out of darkness and quickly re-entering it again, and do what we may, we cannot but repine at this hard law. Was John Mawson a genius? There was not even time to discover it, but I repined. Oh, I did. Then, a little after that, I wrote to my second wife, Hannah. Thank God for his goodness to us, so far from our deserts. Is this not also a form of penetration, the impossible simultaneous presence of two things, unbearable grief and exalted joy in the same space? Science seeks to uncover the facts of nature, but what is a fact when the spirit has fled? After my time of mourning, I applied myself once more to my researches until at length, with the aid of steadfast colleagues and German glassblowers, I succeeded in the task of making an incandescent electric light bulb. In that moment, and I do not say this out of vanity, the world changed. Where hitherto darkness had impatiently awaited its hour, now the light could govern all the hours of the day and night. The light might flicker, but it would not fail, you might say. Mechanisms have no sense of irony, of course. Scientists are often taught to be, and often temperamentally inclined to be, wary of metaphor. That way, magic lies, or poetry. But the human imagination is surely a unity. It can hardly be its own enemy. I had immersed myself in poetry from childhood, and would quote it throughout my life when the occasion arose. At the death of John Mawson, I thought of Milton's Lycidas. For Lycidas is dead, dead ere his prime, young Lycidas, and hath not left his peer, who would not sing for Lycidas. And the nature of the scientific events we were able to witness, with their sudden connections and their power to generate new realities, can fairly be viewed as a kind of poetry, just as the poet Coleridge in his great Biographia Literaria characterized the poetic imagination as a living power and prime agent of all human perception, and a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal acts of creation of the infinite I Am. It was in this spirit, as part of the God-given process of discovering and forming new unities, that in 1871 I came to seek the hand of Hannah White, Fanny's sister, in marriage. The law of the land was against us, forbidding me to marry my deceased wife's sister, and it would remain so for almost 40 years more. But the Swiss order matters differently, and it was to Neuchâtel that we travelled to be wed in the eye of God at the Reformed church in the town. And from this date, my happiness began once more, as a result, perhaps, of a chain reaction in which we could only play our parts in good faith to the best of our ability. You see what I'm doing, making sense, inferring meaning. But meaning, you might say, is not the sphere of the scientist. An observable fact is its own meaning, and its connection to the mind of the Creator is not ours to divine. Metaphysics has largely ceased to be part of the empire of science. You might say I am making a category error, or trying to speak one language with the mind of another. Why could I not be happy with electric light and photography and the discovery of artificial fibre? Could they not be enough? Let me affirm that often I was happy and more than happy with my second wife and a family to which we added, and with our home, with research and the discovery of items and processes useful to my fellow creatures, and with friends and worldly success and the world's applause. But at the edge of things, there always waited that realm of restlessness and doubt, where it seemed impossible to accommodate the spirit to the material nature of things, to glass and metal and filament and vacuum pump and the light that in combination they produced. The light I shed might be only the image of the greater light that must surely lie behind and beyond all our earthly endeavours. For if that were not so, though it must be so, what was our case, our situation, but that of falling through a void without a solid ground of being? I was of my time, as all men are. I stood for liberal hopefulness, reform, improvement, the harnessing of the productive power of science to the common good. I followed the light faithfully, but could not but be aware of the dark. It may be strange to some that it should be a hymn by John Henry Newman, the Cardinal, later the convert to Catholicism, that seems best to convey these tensions and suggest that faith is continually in the presence of doubt. Lead, kindly light, amid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. The night is dark, and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. So long thy power hath blessed me, sure it still will lead me on, o'er moor and fen, o'er crag and torrent, till the night is gone. And with the morn those angel faces smile, which I have loved long since and lost a while. Meantime, along the narrow rugged path thyself hast trod, lead, Saviour, lead me home in childlike faith, home to my God, to rest forever after earthly strife, in the calm light of everlasting life. May it be so. In old age I have come to doubt it, but I cannot abandon the possibility, and I know that to some that might make me the less a scientist. All I can do is admit to my ever-present questioning. I was a Victorian optimist, as I have said. I survived terrible loss. I hope I have been of help to others. Yet I speak now, in the new year of 1914, when it is clear to all serious observers that Europe is on the threshold of a great and terrible conflict which may bring the world we know wholly to destruction. How can it be that Christendom permits and even nurtures such a menace to humanity? Can it be that the great imaginative energies of science and industry has brought us only into the light, only that we may see the better to kill one another, before plunging back into the darkness like so many spent Lucifers into the ruined cities of hell? Put on the lights, in any case. I have no answer, of course. Perhaps you are laughing at me, a man past his time, and one without the armour of irony or cynicism or knowingness to help him on his way. But ladies and gentlemen, in the teeth of the present evidence, I end with an affirmation by a poet who himself knew doubt on intimate terms. That which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. I say again, put on the lights. What else can we do after all? Good night.